She hadn't meant to stop. The wagon creaked under the weight of supplies she didn't need on a route she'd ridden 100 times before. There were no errands, no list, no reason to be near town at all. But something in the air that day changed her direction. Maybe it was the wind curling wrong through the trees, or the distant echo of voices not meant to be heard. Whatever it was, it made her turn. Town was louder than usual. Not in noise, but in tension, like the ground itself held its breath. She rolled into the square and saw the crowd before she saw the cause. There, near the old courthouse, stood 3 boys' sacks tied over their heads, hands bound behind them, lined up like cattle beneath a crooked sign. Orphans, $3 apiece. The crowd wasn't protesting. They weren't ashamed. Some watched like it was sport. Others bartered like it was meat. She stepped down from her wagon, and the dirt beneath her boots cracked with authority. No one looked at her. No one ever did. Oh, not since her husband died. Not since the silence settled over her like a second skin. She wore mourning like armor and spoke to no one unless she had to. But now she walked toward the post where the boys stood. One of them swayed slightly. Too tall for his age, knees nearly buckling. He couldn't have been more than 12. Another bore a purple bruise like a brand beneath the sack's edge. The smallest stood motionless, too still for a child. "Ma'am, you here for one," the auctioneer called. Red-faced, ill-fitting suspenders, nervous hands. He looked at her and laughed awkwardly. "Don't cry, don't talk, don't eat. That's how they've been all morning. Seller's orders." She didn't blink. She handed him silver coins, 6 in total, more than enough. "All 3, she said. "Ma'am, untie them." The crowd stiffened. The auctioneer hesitated, then slowly moved. With each cut, the fabric fell. Eyes met hers. One defiant one, frightened one, familiar. The smallest boy looked straight through her, and in a voice that was too calm, too certain, he whispered, "Miss Helen." She hadn't told anyone her name in over a year. The murmurs grew around her, but she didn't speak. She placed her hands gently on each shoulder, and without another word led them away. They rode in silence. Not a silence of confusion or fear, but of something older, a knowing. The boys didn't ask where they were going, and she didn't explain. The cabin sat on the edge of Black Hollow Ridge where the pines grew too tall for the sun to touch. It wasn't much a slanted barn, a garden gone wild, windows fogged with years, but it was hers. And now it was theirs. She told them to sit. She cooked without a word, letting the rhythm of the kitchen fill the air where questions should have been. She learned their names. Ben the eldest, Liam the bruised, and Sam the boy who said her name before she ever spoke it aloud. When she asked how he knew her, he simply said, "A woman told me in my sleep that you'd come, that you'd bring us home." The words clung to her skin like cold rain, because she had whispered something once to the ground where her husband lay buried. A prayer, a plea. Let someone need me again. And now they did. But peace was a delicate thing. She knew better than to feed them too quickly or ask too much. The worst wounds weren't the ones on skin, they were the kind that festered in silence. So she gave them chores. Routine. She watched how Ben flinched at the sound of boots, how Liam avoided mirrors, how Sam slept with one eye half open. She noticed and she adjusted. The townsfolk didn't come asking. They didn't care. The widow had always been strange. Let her keep her ghosts. But Helen knew better. These weren't ghosts. They were boys. And ghosts don't cry in the middle of the night. She never asked what had been done to them before. Not directly. It was enough to hear the nightmares. The way Ben would thrash in his sleep, or the way Liam stiffened when doors slammed. Sam didn't cry. He just stared at the ceiling, whispering to someone who wasn't there. Still, they stayed. because she gave them space, because she didn't ask for apologies, because when Ben bled from a trap he mishandled, she stitched him quietly and told him he was brave, because when Liam dropped a dish and braced for a blow, she simply handed him another and said, "Accidents happen." Because when Sam asked, "Can I keep my name?" she said, "I think it suits you." And little by little, the silence changed. It wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It became the silence of pancakes, cooking of boots, being laced of a dog barking in the distance. It became the kind of silence where people feel safe enough to sleep, to stay. And so the woman who once begged to be needed found herself the center of something new. Not a family, not yet, but a flicker of one, a fire in the dead of winter. But winter has teeth, and some men don't forget what they believe they own. So when the rider came and the knock echoed against the cabin door like a gunshot, Helen did not flinch. She knew that peace, like all beautiful things, must be defended. And this time she would not fight alone. The mornings came slowly at the edge of Black Bear Ridge, where frost clung to the windows like forgotten memories, and silence hung over the pine-studded valley. The boys, Sam, Eli, and little Noah, still walked like ghosts inside Clara Reed's house, their feet hesitant on the worn wooden floorboards, as if every step might wake something they'd tried to bury. Clara, the widow with storm-gray eyes, and a silence that could bend steel, didn't speak much either. But in her quiet, she gave the boys something no one had before: space. Not distance, but room. Room to breathe, to hurt, to exist without demand. And slowly, something unfamiliar began to unfurl inside the home like a sprout pushing through hard earth. Sam, the oldest, had taken to chopping wood at sunrise, his frame lean but capable. Clara didn't stop him. She showed him where the axes were kept, how to check the blade, how to split the log from the heartwood out. He didn't talk while he worked, didn't need to. The rhythmic thunk of the axe against timber became his voice, an anchor in the chaos of his past. Eli found the library upstairs. Not that it was much a shelf and a half of dusty books, some missing covers, some with ink-smudged pages. But to a boy who'd once been locked in barns and closets, the idea of sitting in the open with a book in his hands felt like a miracle. Clara would find him curled up under the window, sounding out words like he was tasting freedom one syllable at a time. And Noah, sweet Noah, still barely spoke. But he followed Clara like a shadow carrying kindling, sweeping floors, humming under his breath. Sometimes he'd leave small gifts near her chair, a bird feather, a shiny rock, once even a drawing made with a bit of charcoal on scrap cloth. In each, he scrawled the same word, home. Clara never commented. She simply tucked each offering into a drawer in the kitchen where they lay, like holy relics, evidence of a quiet resurrection. It wasn't easy. Healing never is. Sam flinched when Clara walked too close. Eli cried out in his sleep, his hands balled into fists. Noah, who had once laughed at the smallest thing, now jumped at shadows. But Clara understood. She didn't try to erase their wounds. She only made space for them. She planted a garden out back, coaxing life from the frozen earth with Noah's small hands helping her sow seeds. She cooked hearty meals even when the boys barely ate, and she sang to herself in the evenings low melodies that wove through the house like lullabies for the broken. She didn't ask questions they weren't ready to answer. She waited like someone who knew the importance of silence. One afternoon, while rain tapped soft against the roof, Eli brought her a book. "Can you read this one to us?" he asked. Clara glanced at the cover, The Pilgrim's Progress. She hadn't touched it since her husband died, but she nodded. That night, the boys gathered around the fire. Eli cross-legged Sam, leaning against the hearth. Noah curled beside the dog they'd named Rufus. Clara opened the book and began to read. Her voice was rough at first, but steady, and as the story unfolded of journeys, burdens, redemption, the boys leaned in. They didn't ask what the words meant. They just listened. And something changed. Not a flicker, not a spark, but a glow. Faint, but growing. In those early weeks they built routines. Sam chopped wood every morning. Eli read aloud every night. Noah watered the garden and counted stars before bed. Clara stitched holes in their shirts' baked bread that always came out a little lopsided, and left the lantern on until the last boy drifted to sleep. But routines couldn't erase the past. Not completely. One night, Sam sat on the porch sharpening the axe, his face drawn and distant. Clara joined him, handing him a tin mug of tea. "Why do you keep helping us?" he asked, staring into the dark. "Because someone once helped me," she said, "and I didn't think anyone ever would." Sam nodded once slow. Then he said, "I used to steal to eat. I'm not proud, just didn't know what else to do." Clara didn't flinch. "You survived. That's something." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time she saw a question in his eyes that wasn't shaped like fear. "Are we safe now?" Clara didn't lie, not always, but safer than we were. And that matters. They sat in silence after that. But it was a different kind of silence, warmer, less hollow. The kind of silence that said, "We're not alone." By the end of that month, the house felt different. Still old, still worn, but alive. Laughter returned in spurts, like water through an unthawed stream. Sam joked once that Clara snored louder than a bear. Eli spilled tea and blamed it on Rufus. Noah painted a crooked sun on the garden fence and claimed it kept the plants smiling. Clara let them be boys, not burdens, not orphans, not lost causes. And in return they gave her something too purpose movement a reason to greet the dawn. She'd stopped praying long ago, stopped believing anyone heard. But every time she saw Sam's shoulders relax or Eli's smile crack wide, or Noah hum a new tune, she felt like maybe someone had listened after all. The firewood stack grew. The garden sprouted green. And the house long left to dust and sorrow began to breathe again. Healing isn't loud. It doesn't come with fanfare. It arrives like a whisper in the middle of the night, like a hand reaching across a table, like a voice reading a story when you didn't even know you needed one. And that's exactly what Clara Reed had become. Not a savior, not a saint, but a quiet revolution. The kind of revolution that begins with firewood books and the simple act of staying. The forest lay hushed in pre-dawn shadows when Clara awoke to the distant echo of hoofbeats. She pressed her ear to the window just as the first streak of dawn painted the horizon pale pink. The rhythm of those distant horses, steady, deliberate, sent a chill through her bones. Not the wild pulse of someone passing through, but the measured approach of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Every instinct Clara had learned in the wilderness of trauma roused her move. Silently, protect the boys. Confront without fear. She slipped from bed, careful not to wake Sam, Eli, or Noah. In the kitchen, she lit a lantern and grabbed her husband's revolver, weighing it in her hand, a promise of protection she never wanted to use but knew she might have to. The boys stirred downstairs before she could find them. Sam was first standing by the front window with a look of resolute calm. Eli followed, clutching the well-worn copy of Pilgrim's Progress. Noah came last, clutching the doll he had fashioned from rags, his young face etched with trust and fear. "They're coming," Clara said softly. Sam nodded, eyes steady. "We stay inside." Eli's voice trembled slightly. "Is it the men who took us?" Clara took a breath. "Maybe, but no matter who, we stand together." Muffled calls drifted through the morning quiet. Heavy steps on the porch. Then a knock, 3 slow tapping beats that sounded like code. Clara answered the door, revolver held low but point toward her heart. When it opened, a young man stood on the threshold, dust on his trousers, fatigue in his eyes. His hand shook as he held out a scrap of paper. Martha Reed, he said. Clara stiffened. When he spoke her name, it felt like a fractured mirror had been shattered across her chest. My name is John Kavanaugh, he said. I was told if I came here, I'd find answers. I know about the boys. Clara stared, torn between fire and compassion. The boys clustered behind her, a silent wall of innocence and hurt. Sam's tall frame remained calm but alert. Eli gripped the book like a shield, and Noah buried into Clara's side. I'm not called Martha anymore, Clara said. The boys call me Clara. John's eyes flicked past her to the boys. My sister Grace, she was in the network. She was taken when she was 16 by men from Porter's Mill. I finally found out where they sold her. She died trying to escape. I thought, maybe there's a chance she was with you and I'd find her. Sam's hand brushed the doorframe. She's not here, he said. No, Clara said softly. But she's why these boys are here, because she helped them, she saved them, and I'm still doing what she started. John swallowed. Grief and relief flickered in his gaze. I found your ledger, names, dates, passages. I tracked you here. Clara's voice was quiet but sharp. You followed us across counties. Why didn't you call the sheriff? I did. His voice cracked. No one believed me. They laughed it off. Eli interrupted, voice steady though small. They thought our names would turn people away. Clara reached down, took his hand. Let him speak. John nodded. I wanted one person to hear me. So I came here. She stood aside to let him in. No guns drawn now, the door wide open to his broken hope. As he stepped over the threshold, Sam closed the door behind him, and Clara placed 2 chairs, offering him a seat. The boys sat opposite, quiet eyes, wary but curious. John pressed the ledger into Clara's hand. The pages were stained and dog-eared. He pointed at a name, Benjamin Clark. I believed he was gone, he whispered. The boys exchanged a glance. The name matched Beck's real surname. Clara met Beck's eyes. They found your papers, she said softly. We came for you before they could. Tears sprang into Beck's eyes, not from fear but relief. He slipped from his chair and straightened. I'm not that name anymore, he said fiercely. I'm Beck Reed. John exhaled. I'm sorry, I didn't know. Clara spoke up again. You're safe now. We are together. A tremor ran through the room like a breath passing through old curtains. The 4 of them, Clara, Sam, Eli, Noah, and their new ally, John, sat in a circle bound by shared loss and hope. Outside, dawn bloomed over Black Bear Ridge, golden light filtering through dusty windows. Then came the faint crackle of breaking wood, the front door splitting inward. Boots pressed against the threshold. Men on horseback. Clara rose, revolver in hand. The boys flinched but didn't cry out. Sam moved to flank her. Beckno Sam kept his stance. Eli held John's sleeve. Noah released his hold on Clara's skirt to stare steady. The first man entered, rifle trained on them. His eyes went straight to Clara. You read, he demanded. We have orders. Clara met his gaze head on. No, she said. You have orders from someone who doesn't know what we are. Shots rang out in the sunlight. Clara fired low, intentional. The man staggered, surprised by force and accuracy. Sam dropped his axe behind his back. Eli prayed under his breath. Noah pressed a finger to his lips. The men outside halted. Voices called. Horses whinnied. Clara reloaded. We told them, she whispered to Sam. Eli echoed with a trembling, We stand together. The door shuddered under another blow. But as dawn broke fully, the house stood firm. The past had come riding to reclaim them, but Clara, her boys, and a brother's lost hope stood stronger. Each step had been turbulent. A child's scream, a ledger's record, a door's crash. But they had chosen each other. and as the morning light filtered through broken wood and brave hearts, it whispered of something old and precious. They were not defined by how they came, but how they stood. Together. In the weeks that followed the confrontation at Black Bear Ridge, Clara found herself awoken one quiet morning by the soft sound of wood being carved outside. Lantern light filtered through the curtains, and she pushed herself out of bed, curiosity stirring a gentle hope within her. Downstairs the stove was dim and cold, no kettle yet, no clatter of breakfast. Instead, there was the rhythmic scraping of a carving knife against pine. Stepping onto the porch, Clara found Sam huddled on the threshold, the early light outlining his tall form. He held a length of freshly hewn pine, smooth and warm, under his calloused hands. Kneeling beneath the old oak at the edge of their garden, he carefully traced letters into its surface. Read, 3 simple letters, each stroke, deliberate each one, robust with history. Clara leaned on the doorframe, warmth in her chest. Sam didn't speak, just nodded when she asked about it. In that quiet motion she understood. He was marking a claim not of property, but of identity. After all they had endured, this name was more than a word. It was survival, carved in wood. Eli and Noah appeared silently beside her. His younger brothers were drawn by the afternoon ritual. Eli carried the ledger John had brought, its pages splayed open to the entry beneath which Beck, his real name, was crossed out, Beck Reed, written anew in sturdy ink. The ledger, once a record of missing children sold to the highest bidder, was being reclaimed, repurposed. Clara stood there, her heart full. Each Reed had taken pieces of their fractured story and begun reassembling them not just within themselves, but within the home they were forging. The oak wouldn't stand forever, but it would remind them of this moment, the moment they chose themselves. That noon, they buried the ledger under the porch with words and names that would root them there forever. Clara watched as they sealed it with pine shavings and soil, a silent promise to the past they survived and the future they would grow. The bark of the oak glowed in the sunlight, a badge of belonging. Over the next days, Clara noticed the subtle blossoming of confidence in her sons. Sam no longer flinched when strangers rode past. He held himself differently in the saddle hands, steady on the reins. Eli began writing letters in the ledger first, awkward notes, then whole pages of thanks to Clara, to John, to life itself. Noah's laughter returned soft but alive as he chased chickens and rabbits in the garden, chasing life once again. One evening, after supper, the boys invited Clara to sit with them beneath the oak. She joined them on a simple blanket spread out on the soft grass, dusk's golden hues fading into starlight. Sam produced a hatchet, its blade sharpened clean, and passed it to Clara. Curious, she held it, tracing fingers along its edge. "We thought you might want a handprint, too," Sam said softly. He passed her a piece of pine, similar in size and grain to the sign he'd carved. She took the hatchet, hesitated, then pressed her hand, palm even, into the wood. Sam took it, guiding her fingers as she carved her name, Clara Reed. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Under the oak on that night of quiet stars, the Reed family found permanence, a tree, a name, an oath carved in pine, standing defiant against erosion or erosion of memory. The following morning, Clara awoke early, the scent of pine warm in the porch air. She stepped out to find the oak scattered with new carvings, a shield pine needles her boy's marks of growth. Sam had added a simple phrase beneath his name, protected. Eli etched lines of a book, arcane letters streaming outward. Noah, with Abigail's help, had carved a tiny rabbit. Clara knelt, fingers tracing the lines. Their wounds, their stories, they were forever written here. The natural world had become their ledger, the oak their living testament. There would be storms, droughts, threats, but the tree stood tall. Their names stood tall. That afternoon John visited again, riding in from Porter's Mill to check on their progress. He paused at the oak, running a gloved hand over the carvings, his eyes misting with shared pride. Clara came to stand beside him, warm in the sun, feeling him step over the threshold, not just as an outsider but as part of their tapestry. "Healing needs landmarks," John said quietly. "We need reminders of where we were and what we're building." Clara nodded. "This is ours." Together they paced the land behind the cabin for signs of abuse of trespass. But the wood remained peaceful. Deer tracks glided between garden rows. Songbirds nested in the rafters. In a corner of the yard, Mayavan, it was what Noah offered as a name, had taken to bringing Clara freshly cut wildflowers tied with leucine twine, their delicate colors humming life in the air. She accepted each offering, placing the bouquets where sunlight caught them best. One afternoon, Beck, his name, now his own, came home with an armful of seedlings. "I want to plant a grove," he said, "so if anyone finds our tree, they'll see a family rooted here living." They worked that weekend, pine and cedar apple saplings rising in rows around the oak. Sam taught the youngest how to wrap roots in moss. Eli recorded each tree species in the ledger, careful dates and hopes in graceful script. Even Clara dug her hands dark with earth, her sweat warm with coming summer. Over dinner, Sunday evening, the family sat beneath strings of lanterns strung between the oak and the porch. Mason jar lights swung softly. The air hung fragrant with cedar and earth and new growth. Clara looked at each face, Sam strong and steady, Eli gentle and thoughtful, Noah bright and soft, Beck fierce and caring. John stood near the edge, watching over them, no longer just an ally, but extended family. Clara raised her glass a cup of iced tea cooled with mint from the garden, and spoke to names carved in pine, to wounds healed by time, to roots that bleed. "Here's to us." No silent pause this time, no whispered echo of fear. There were smiles, clinks of glasses, and the glow of home spreading around them. When John left late that night, Clara hugged him at the porch. He settled on his horse lantern slung behind. "You ever need an extra hand," he said, voice hushed, "you've got more than you know." She smiled as he rode off into the dark. "We'll still hold the fort." Stepping back inside, she paused under the carved tree. In the refined letters of her name and the names of her boys, she saw more than identity. She saw love, they saw community. Beneath the oak, their hearts were nailed to something eternal. And as wind brushed pine needles overhead, it sounded like a chorus of promises. "We are here, we remain. We are family written in wood and held in hearts forever." Late summer bled into autumn with a quiet defiance, and the winds that once carried danger now carried only the scent of turning leaves. Clara found herself rising earlier these days, not from fear, but from habit. The world no longer whispered threats through the trees. It whispered something new, peace perhaps, or the tentative trust that peace might hold. She would often sit on the porch steps with a warm mug and watch the sky lighten behind the oak tree her name, and the boys still firm in the pine where they had carved it. Sometimes she traced those letters just to feel them real beneath her fingertips. That morning the wind shifted. Not the kind that breaks branches or chases shadows, but the kind that carries memory. Clara felt it before she saw anything, an unease in her chest, a weight behind her ribs that told her this calm couldn't hold forever. A hawk circled high above the ridge, its shadow dragging long across the earth. By noon, the unease had settled into her bones. Beck was chopping wood near the coop. Sam and Eli were tightening the roof beams, preparing for winter. Noah chased rabbits with a hand-carved stick, wild laughter bubbling through the golden afternoon. John hadn't visited in weeks, but Clara knew he was still watching. She could feel it like a thread stitched through the hills. And then came the smoke, not thick, not yet threatening, but steady. A dark pillar curling into the blue above the ridge. Clara moved fast. She called the boys, gathered water. Beck was already on horseback before she could speak. "Just a scout fire," he said, though the tension in his jaw betrayed his calm. "I'll check the east slope." She nodded, trusting him, but something in her wanted to scream. When he didn't return by nightfall, Sam saddled his horse. Eli begged to go, but Clara shook her head. "Two's enough," she said. "Three's a risk." She watched Sam vanish into the dark the same direction Beck had ridden hours earlier. It was just Clara and Eli now, with Noah asleep on the floor and the wind beginning to howl. Lanterns flickered as she moved through the cabin. The old rifle leaned by the door, loaded and polished. Her fingers brushed the trigger as she passed it. Not yet. At dawn, they returned. Beck bruised Sam, limping, both silent. They had found the fire's source, the old hunting cabin at Splitwood Pass, burned to ash. No body, no message, but carved into a scorched tree nearby in jagged letters, "Still mine." Clara stared at it for a long time, not because of what it said, but because of how little it meant now. "You okay?" Sam asked, voice ragged. Clara turned to him, her spine straight as the oaks that shaded their home. "No," she said, "but I'm ready." That night they didn't sleep. They fortified not because they expected an attack, but because they had lived through one. Clara wrapped each window in wet canvas, packed dry flour and sugar into sealed barrels. Eli checked the cellar, tested the bolts. Beck carved new initials into the coupe door. "We remain." Simple, defiant, true. The attack never came. Instead, autumn passed in cautious grace. Leaves fell like embers across the fields. Beck started tutoring Noah in the evening, simple letters, rough math, quiet lessons by the fire. Eli took to building small wooden animals, shaping them from scraps of cedar. Sam harvested squash and dried corn. Clara began recording everything, first in letters to John, then in a journal she bound from leftover ledger pages. The silence that had once haunted her now felt like freedom. And then came the fire. It started in the night. Clara smelled it first, thick, oily, unnatural. Beck was the first to the window. "Barn," he said. "No panic, just urgency." Eli grabbed the water buckets. Sam shouted for Noah, scooping him into his arms. Outside, the barn was already half lost. Flames licked up the hayloft, roaring like some wounded animal. But the livestock were out, the tools already stored elsewhere. The blaze took nothing but wood and space. And still, Clara watched it burn with a quiet ache. Not because she'd lost anything, but because she'd survived enough to feel its loss without fear. At dawn, they stood in the soot, covered in ash. Beck knelt in the rubble and picked out a charred horseshoe. "He was here," he said, "or sent someone." Clara nodded. "Then let him see this," she replied. She took a stick from the ash and drew a circle in the dirt. Then she knelt, palms pressed against the earth, and began to speak, not loud, not broken, but with the certainty of a woman who knew her own voice. "You tried to burn us," she whispered. "But all you did was light the path we'd already chosen." The next morning, they began rebuilding. Not just the barn, but the fields, the fences, the things that fire could never truly claim. Clara planted new seeds along the blackened ridge sunflowers, strong and unyielding. Eli added a second room to the cabin. Sam built a new barn door before the walls were even finished. And Beck, with calloused hands and a quiet heart, carved a new sign above the porch, "Home." John returned in late November, riding through frost and fog with a satchel full of letters and stories. He stopped at the gate eyes, scanning the land, the rebuilt barn, the carved sign. "You did it," he said. "You outlasted him." Clara met him at the porch, arms crossed, smile soft. "We didn't just outlast him," she said. We outlived what he tried to make of us. That winter the fire never touched them again. Snow fell clean and quiet. Noah learned to whistle. Eli began teaching letters to the children in the valley. Beck built birdhouses. Sam found an old fiddle in town and taught himself how to play. And Clara, she kept writing stories, warnings, dreams. She taught others how to survive, how to rebuild. Her words traveled beyond their ridge, carried by letters and lantern light. In time, they became legend, not for how they suffered, but for how they rose. Not just survivors, not victims, fireproof in spirit, rooted in pine, born again with every dawn. They were the family fire could not burn. Spring had barely touched the valley when the unexpected arrived a letter that seemed innocent enough at first glance, yet carried in its weight something rare and unsettling. Clara found it nailed to the porch post one morning, the envelope plain, unassuming, but stiff and deliberate. No return address, no signature, just a single sentence scrawled in thin, precise ink. They aren't your only sons. Her heart stilled on the spot. Beck dropped the wood he was carrying. Sam froze mid-step to the barn. Eli halted by the fence. Noah stared up at her, confusion etched across his face. The words seemed impossible, but Clara knew curses hide behind impossibilities. Inside, they gathered around the kitchen table. Clara's eyes didn't waver as she slid the envelope across. Beck picked it up, his fingers trembling. The silence stretched until Eli broke it. What does it mean? Clara looked at each of them, deep gray eyes, warm yet hard. Someone believes we have one or more children out there, boys like you. Sam swallowed. Could be anyone. Maybe it's a threat. No, Clara said softly. It's something else, an invitation. It was enough. They stared at one another, hearts drumming together. The valley suddenly felt small, like home too small. That night, Clara lay awake listening to the wind shift through budding branches. The envelope lay unopened on her lap. She traced those words again. They aren't your only sons. The implication spread like frost through her spine. What if there were others lost, hidden, terrified, broken? Beck came beside her with 2 mugs of tea. She accepted one without looking up. How many children do they think I saved? He asked quietly. She took a sip. We know of 5, Beck, Eli, Sam, Noah, and the newest Jonas. Some letters mention even more Ben Pauley. I don't know how many. Beck set down his mug. So it's a test. Clara nodded. They're watching. Whoever sent it, they want to see what we'll do. He stared out the window into the night. We find them, he said. Not asked, not hoped, stated. She caught his hand. Yes. At dawn, Clara called Sam and Eli. Tomorrow, she said, we ride again. Their next destination. Pine Hollow Church, 100 miles north, where rumors whispered about another ragtag group of boys rescued from dark barns and hidden auctions. They packed provisions, loaded, horses shod, and hearts bracing. What they didn't expect was company. On the second evening, just as dusk curled over the ridge, a rider appeared, a middle-aged woman in a dust-red coat. She dismounted with purpose. I'm Margaret, she said. I heard you might need help. This concerns my Gabriel. Clara studied her. Margaret looked hopeful yet wary. Tell us, she said. Gabriel was 12, stolen from a farm near Pine Hollow 2 winters past. Sold, then disappeared. Margaret had searched for years, following rumors, holding on to hope. Her eyes glistened like embers rekindled. He wrote me, she whispered. Just his initials, GW on bark. Mama, I'm alive. Clara felt the valley shrink again. Enough matter-of-fact pain that they could ride straight into it, share it under sky. She nodded and embraced Margaret. We ride at first light. Together, They tracked for 4 days through fog-soaked glades past creeks bright with pebbles and singing. On the 5th night they found footprints, one pair small, fresh, mixed with horse tracks. Beck led the way. Eli checked every whisper among the trees. Sam brought up the rear. Clara and Margaret shared a wordless look. Hope and fear tangled in their chests. They followed the trail to an abandoned sugar mill at the edge of Pine Hollow. Rusted iron cogs lay like bones in the dust. The place smelled of rot and memory. Night brought shadows that moved like shapes in old paintings. They approached on foot. Inside, 3 boys crouched behind a beam. Injured, unwashed, wild-eyed. One of them turned. Gabriel. Margaret gasped. He froze, then ran to her with everything a child can carry, pride and terror and hope. They hugged until he trembled in her arms. Clara watched, felt her chest clamp and release. Beck came close quietly. The other boys watched from the shadows, ghosts who mirrored the rescue of Sam, Beck, Noah, Eli, and Jonas. Clara motioned. They emerged. It was silent for a beat so long that even the crickets paused. Then crying. Hugs. Sparking of tears. Margaret held Gabriel, rocking him. The others clung to each other. They spent the night in that mill, tending wounds, offering bread, wrapping arms around trembling bodies. Gabriel told them of harsh voices, of cold floors, of being moved along before he could learn to trust. He spoke of hope, of a dream of rescue. His words were rough but alive. In the morning, Clara led the ride home with 9 boys. Joy, they had forgotten how loud that could be. Someone whistled, someone sang, someone laughed. The journey softened the land. Beck carried Gabriel's pack. Sam led the youngest. Eli rode beside Margaret. Clara watched over them all. Along the way, Gabriel found his voice. He shared stories. The other boys listened. Noah hid behind Clara's skirt sometimes. Jonas brushed elbows with him gently. They talked about school fishing music, and when they reached the valley, someone let out a whoop. The fence post carved with the words family and hope stood like a vow. Clara stepped forward, feeling the valley open inside her. Gabriel knelt, carved his initials beneath the others. They were here now, permanently. That night, the house blazed with laughter, tears, questions, and hope. Clara raised her glass. Tea, coffee, cider, doesn't matter. Her voice trembled with emotion. To family chosen. To the boys who found home. To the fight worth fighting. Every face glowed. Then she turned to the camera. If you found this story meaningful, subscribe and support us. We're building hope one chapter at a time. Your support keeps this light burning, and there's so many more boys waiting for rescue. Help us write the next chapter. The room fell silent. Then the boys, young and healed, erupted with joy. Clara smiled, knowing this was only the beginning.